The See You in Valhalla podcast. I am your host, Mitch, and I am the owner and head coach over at CrossFit Magny in Boise, Idaho. And today we are going to be breaking down stamina. And I am not joined by Jeff, my typical co host. That's usually somewhat of a comic relief and also a layman's perspective. So I apologize if I get a little bit wordy with some of these responses. We're going to kick off today's podcast by kind of just scrolling the gram a little bit, looking at some content, and diving in a little bit. So this first thing that I'm going to be looking at, apparently, let me share my screen first. All right, so we're just kind of scrolling through my Instagram. So menstrual cycle training considerations. So just an interesting post, says time period, the midway point of the menstrual cycle for most women. Duration, 1 day. Changes in physiology last 1 to 3 days. Hormonal changes, estrogen peaks just before ovulation. Luteinizing hormone spikes. Physical changes, lower body temperature, increased pain tolerance, improved recovery. How to train/program. Many feel their best physically training physically during ovulation. So this is a great time to train intensely and shoot for PRs. It's kind of a cool little consideration to think about. Um, there's a little bit more to that post if you guys wanted to check it out. That is on the Strength Cave. Nothing on Netflix is worth sleeping less than 7 hours per night. Here's what happens when you don't get enough sleep. What does sleep deprivation do to hormone levels? Cortisol levels increase, growth hormone tanks, testosterone decreases severely. Translation, the ability to recover and physically maintain your body dramatically decreases. What does sleep deprivation do to your cardiovascular system? Blood pressure increase, heart rate increases, increased risk of heart disease. Translation, missing sleep is horrible for your heart. It's not worth it. What does it do to your brain and mind? Increased risk of anxiety, depression, Alzheimer's, dementia, and less emotional stability. Sleep is non-negotiable. It needs to be the top health priority. If life also happens and sleep can suffer, don't beat yourself up. Shoot for 7 to 9 hours of sleep at least 80% of the time. I think it's cool that they put that at least 80% of the time, because it's just sometimes it's not going to happen, and you don't need to be so like distracted by the fact that it didn't happen that you become like crippled with the knowledge that it didn't happen, and then you can't do anything or choose not to do anything because of that. Sometimes I think I see that happen with people where they know that something exists and then they're crippled by their own knowledge of the existence of something. It's like they're fearing something that isn't real at that moment. This is something I wanted to dive into just a little bit. It's what does sleep deprivation do to hormone levels? Cortisol levels increase. Now, the reason why I want to focus on cortisol levels increases is because a lot of people really want to lose weight on this fitness journey, because our society, our culture, everything's kind of wired for us to actually gain weight. So in the pursuit of trying to lose weight, if your cortisol level is out of control or it's increased, it is going to mess with your insulin levels and thus your blood sugar levels, and thus it's going to really mess with fat storage. So if you are not controlling stress, which is cortisol is a stress hormone, then you have very minimal shot at probably losing weight. And I just want to really emphasize that you can do all the weight loss stuff you want, but remember, a diet only works if 10 years from now you're still doing it and it's still working. Why did God create Adam before Eve? He didn't want any advice on how to do it. Oh, that's a pretty good dad joke. That's a pretty good dad joke. If you want a massive competitive advantage over every gym in your area, all you have to do is make promises and keep every damn one of them. That is actually really, really hard. I hate making promises because there's so many factors that feel out of my control. But as a gym owner, I do feel like I focus a lot on trying to bring myself closer to controlling more factors. And it's tough. This is Edu Portala. If you guys haven't checked this guy out, this guy used to train Conor McGregor at one point, and he's not a fighter per se. He is a movement guru of sorts, for lack of a better term. I don't know that he would use that term for himself. He's a very humble guy from Israel. Really interesting stuff that he does. I highly recommend you check out Edu Portal and just respect movement more because of kind of what he brings to the team there. He's also a pretty gifted mover himself. Every time I smack myself doing double unders, I'm not gonna go into that. But this David Weck. So this is the guy who brought you the Bosu ball. If you guys are familiar with the Bosu ball, and he is got this rope flow thing that I actually am really curious about. But you see all these platforms too. These are all like basically inventions of his. Really diving deep into body mechanics and things like that. So I think a lot of what he's demonstrating is actually how much we need our core for a lot of functional movement. And he's just showing a lot of different ways to implement that using some of his own tools as well as bringing in some other tools like there you see the safety squat bars and stuff like that. Really interesting guy if you haven't checked him out. This guy's over 50 and this guy can sprint. He can do a lot of different things. So I don't think you can really argue much with the fact that he's got something special going there. And we can all probably benefit. This rope flow stuff is really interesting. I'm curious to see if I can get in on some of that in the future. All right. Let's kick off the podcast now if that wasn't enough time for you. We are going to switch over here. So let me. I want to bring in this really quick. So today we are talking about stamina, the ability of the body systems to process, deliver, store, and utilize energy. So we talked about cardiovascular respiratory endurance last week, and I mean all of these things are rabbit holes. So we're never going to fully be able to figure anything out, right? We're never going to dive all the way down the rabbit hole, but we're always going to touch on these things. So stamina is what we're touching on today. And I think a lot of people, when they think of endurance, they're actually referring to stamina. They use endurance and stamina interchangeably. And that makes sense because stamina, if I had to like define it a little bit more simply, would be like muscular endurance. Whereas cardiovascular endurance is referring to the heart and lungs ability to sustain energy and produce it and all that stuff. So I think that's kind of what you're looking at when you're looking at endurance is you're either talking about stamina or you're talking about like I said, this cardiovascular endurance. So why is stamina so important for us to consider? Well, there are many reasons why it would be important for us to consider, but one of the main reasons is I would say that for injury prevention, stamina plays a very large role because I think what happens in a lot of injuries is the stamina of supporting muscle groups deteriorates, and then you have I guess you could call it an irresponsible amount of volume, whatever you want to say, but the other muscle groups can no longer tolerate it. And then it starts sending you the signal of pain and things like that because you've just exceeded your capacity. I think stamina plays a very large role in that. So stamina does need to be kind of like a predecessor to, I think, maximum strength. I think anybody who's doing max strength training, it's not bad, but I think there should be a real emphasis in your accessory pieces on making sure your stamina in supporting muscle groups is there. So like taking someone who's going to do a max bench press, let's say, as a power lifter, right? They're exceptional at strength in powerlifting. Then it would be really cool of them and their accessory work to make sure that all the different heads of the pec, like the minor, the major, all that stuff, are also able to endure a lot of repetition and volume, as well as the upper back, the posterior shoulder, the um, tricep, all of that stuff kind of needs a foundation and some stamina so that if one got tired it's not going to overload the other one because it never would get tired if you had the stamina, I guess you could say. The other thing is a lot of times fitness tests, like military fitness tests, police fitness tests, um, and I mean, looking at like the CrossFit Open, you are going to see a significant premium on shoulder stamina or just stamina of all sorts, right? And so really it just means how many times can I really keep these contractions going before I need a break? And when I need a break, how little of a break do I need before I can continue with those contractions? And that's really what we're looking at with stamina. So when I look at stamina from a training perspective, I think that the best way to train it is to understand what it is you're trying to achieve and then create a progressive overloaded system if you're really targeting that. So let's say I am targeting improving my push-up score in the military. So I want to bring my push-ups up. Um, so we're largely dealing with the pec muscles, but I would say what you want to do is take what I like doing is three different movements that are all going to hit the same area, but they get simpler and simpler in contractions. All right. So take for instance the push up. I might start with like a heavier bench press, go to regular push-ups, and then do floor press with a very light load, right? And so, or dumbbell floor press for that matter, it doesn't really matter, but do some sort of floor press because it's a decreased range, etc. But and that's literally back to back. Your goal should be like no rest. I hit like let's say it's 10 moderately difficult bench press into 15 push-ups into 30 floor press with a relatively lightweight, non-stop, resting 90 seconds and repeating, resting 90 seconds and repeating, right? And so that would build up my ability to contract over and over and over and over again. And I could just pick two movements too. I could just go push-up floor press or I could go push up really light bench press. It just you could do a lot of different variations there, but more specific to the push up, probably the better. If we want to reach outside that, we also need to make sure the supporting muscle groups of the pec are brought up with it. So that would be like the anterior deltoid and doing some flies and things like that, or flaring out the elbows intentionally and doing some controlled work there just to build up the stamina in the anterior deltoid. The tricep is definitely going to be a big one. So you could apply the same concept to tricep work, like doing some skull crushers into banded pushdowns. Those would be a good combo where you can accumulate a lot of reps in a short amount of time. Another one that I really love is doing like weighted dips, unweighted dips, bench dips. Boom, 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 back to back to back. You could either go to like failure on each of those things, and then as you hit failure, you're dropping. There's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, but those are, in my opinion, some of the best ways to train the stamina of a muscle. Now, when we talked about stamina, we also look at like, well, how do I also increase my ability to rest minimally and perform again? Now, if we're looking at that, we need to get rid of waste in the area quickly. And that comes from having a better cardiovascular system. So, going back to that first thing we talked about last week, making sure that you have a good aerobic system, basically. But also, you could do, let's take my uh, dips example, let's say. So, we go weighted dips, unweighted dips, bench dips, and then 2 minutes at a recovery pace on a bike where the heart rate does kind of stay a little bit more elevated and there's a little more blood flow. um, okay, so in a nutshell, that's what stamina is. Why it's so important is because we're trying to prevent injury. So a lot of lower back injuries might take place because something gave out and something else had to increase. So think of your brain sending a signal to your muscle to fire over and over and over and over. Well, then on a structural, like a cellular level, the muscle can no longer make the contractions happen. Well, what happens is it sends that signal to the brain, it's no longer contracting. And so the brain tries to find another path, another place to contract. And that can be really, really good. But if we push it too far, we, as a training stimulus, it could be really good. If we push it too far, it could also overdo it, right? And so then you have a muscle that pulls so tight it creates an imbalance of tension around a joint, and that's where the pain is. And your back is nothing but a bunch of different joints, right? So something to think about. Um, I'm trying to think of like the place where stamina is probably like the most important when it comes to um, staying healthy for like longevity. And I think probably one of the places it's going to be most important, I guess if I just had to generalize it, it would be your feet might be one of the first stops there. And the reason that is because we have to look at like the aging athlete and what's the risks as we get older and older and older. And the risk when you're 90 isn't that you can't do some push-ups. That's not the risk, right? The risk is that you're going to fall, hurt something, and that's going to cause your immune system to weaken as it's trying to go through that injury. Um, and so with that being the scary thing, let's say a fall, right? We probably need to find the best ways to catch ourselves from falling. And so, not getting tired in the first place would be a place. So I would look at hips and feet probably first, and then spreading out from there and covering ground in between and then above too. So I would probably say feet and hips, and then I'd maybe go knees, um, and then probably the shoulders, if I had to just give basics. Now, core would be a part of all of that all the time. You should always be kind of having some dose of core tension going on and trying to keep that balance in training, using your core in all the different ways that it's designed to be used, which is a lot. It's not as simple as people oftentimes try to make it. So, like, my example there is a lot of times people say the core's job is just to hold your spine in a stable position, or in that, that normal curve position. And I argue that's definitely not the case because if you look at sprinting, they're definitely not holding their spine totally neutral during that. If you look at a lot of expressions of elite athleticism, there is very little uh, keeping the spine really straight. Now, when you're looking at lifting external loads, it's absolutely crucial, right, to drive the most power in a controlled manner. I would argue that's a huge part of that. But when you're looking at less control, more speed, I believe that plays a large role in lateral flexion of the spine, especially. So making sure there's things in there that you're doing all the time for the core, and training the stamina of them so that when the lateral flexion tires out, your spinal erectors don't fire so hard that you can't walk for a couple days, right? Spinal erectors are the lower back muscles. So essentially, I mean, to say all of that in 18 minutes, it feels pretty fast, but um, I think I could take you guys along a little bit. I did some training with a coach from Brute Strength, which is a pretty reputable like programming company for CrossFitters. Um, and I believe my coach kind of works alongside Matt. I forget his last name right now, but the guy who coaches Danielle Brandon. And wall balls were one of the things I needed to work on because it's a pretty big weakness for me. And so, like, we test Karen and we go, okay, well, Karen relative to these other benchmarks and other things, like, seems to be kind of the weak point. And then he goes, okay, well, where does it feel like Karen's like holding you back, right? And other than my homeowners association, Karen is always holding me back, in the sense that my shoulders feel like they're on fire and I can't move them anymore. And so we went down a journey of a lot of wall balls with a lot of pressing movements combined with it. So I don't remember exact workouts, so don't quote me directly, but one of my favorite like light bulbs that happened in that was doing like a set of, let's call it, 30 wall balls unbroken, followed by 1 minute of PVC pipe strict press, followed by 2-minute recovery pace on the bike for 4 rounds, right? So overall volume is pretty close to Karen in that it's 120 reps of that wall ball, but those PVC presses were easily the worst part of that workout. That was so hard because you always know you can keep it moving, But that's what stamina training needs to do, is it has to be something where you can keep it moving, right? Maybe initially you're fast or explosive or heavy, but then you're going to less explosive and just more continuation. Another workout that I remember Chris Hinshaw talking about on a podcast, and Chris Hinshaw would be kind of like who we go to, who we look to see how to best train uh, the. Give me 1 second. Remind me, Chris Hinshaw. That's what we're talking about. I always do this where I unplug my computer to relocate it, and then I forget to plug it back in, and my computer's going out on me, so it just gets close to dying. Bet yeah. And one of the things he was doing, it was like a core thing. He was doing Russian twists where you're as explosive as possible for, let's say, 15 seconds, and then you drop your feet to the floor to kind of release the tension a little bit, but you keep the reps moving a little slower for 45 seconds. And you do that 4 times through straight in a row, let's say. So you've been doing contractions for 4 minutes straight, which is something that you guys probably never really do. But if you really want to work on stamina, you have to find ways, how do I keep this muscle group that I need to fix working, right? So if you're looking at a test that where you felt like, man, this one part of my body really limited me, you have to determine, is it strength or is it stamina? Tests that you can do for this. There's a few different ways to skin it, and it's a little bit nuanced, but it works out. So one is you have to kind of just do the test, let's say, whatever it is. Maybe it's just a workout that's holding you back. And you go, okay, well, this feels like it really got tired. It could be even like a life event. So carrying your kid, your bicep maybe feels like really tired. You could be like, well, I know I need some bicep stamina, right? That could be just a logical way to think about it, is like, what in daily life do you get like this muscle thing where it's like, man, it just gets so tired that I can't do it, right? If you shovel things a lot, or if you're going, and shoveling dirt now that it's springtime, let's say, and your lower back's just lit up, it's probably pretty reasonable to assume that you need some stamina work lower back, right? Because it's giving you the signal, right? I would follow that signal to some degree. Next thing that you could do is you can do a 1 rep max kind of testing. So let's take our deadlift, for example, and we can look at, okay, well, what's our 1 rep max potential there, right? And so get, with technical proficiency, establish a 1 rep max. And then take 50% of that number, make sure you're well rested, and perform 20 reps as fast as you can control the reps. You are allowed to take breaks, but your goal should be to do it in the shortest window possible. So you're doing 20 nonstop reps is the goal, or with 50%. So with that second portion of the test, if you can't complete the 20 without setting the bar down, then stamina would become a higher priority to someone who's trying to be well balanced across the 10 general physical skills that that this whole podcast is kind of leaning into. All right. So again, it doesn't mean that putting more weight on your deadlift is bad. If you're a power lifter, you kind of ignore that because your priority is strength. Absolutely. You want strength to actually rise above stamina and all this other stuff. Um, so, but when you're looking at training or training for life, right, to live a longer life, then we might take that 1 rep max number, do 50% for 20 reps, and see how we tolerate it. The other aspect of that, so it's not just if you can't do it. That's just an easy way to say you failed and you need to work on stamina. Let's say you can do it, but your breathing is out of control. Like, let's say you have to breathe like 5 times in 20 seconds, 5 inhales and exhales in 20 seconds immediately following that, then there's a good chance that that gassed you that much. You probably still need to work on stamina before building back your strength. Or maybe it's a good way to say, like, I could probably work on these two in tandem a little bit. And there's a couple ways to skin that as well. So just to give you that example, though, you can do like a 1 rep max test followed by a 50%. Another one, and this is more about neuromuscular efficiency. So it's not really, I don't know if it really falls into true stamina when it comes to like muscle contractile like repetition. But neuromuscular efficiency is something that I think should be tested and addressed if it's a problem. And that's basically where you again kind of perform a 1 rep max. Then you take like, I think it's generally 80% of that, and then you go well rested, max unbroken reps until complete failure. When once you hit failure, record those reps. And I think what you're looking for is double digits on your NME. So on your 80%, you should be able to hit closer to 10 reps. Now that would be breaking down into different types of muscle endurance, so a different form of stamina. So stamina could be breaking out if we're thinking muscle endurance. So just know that when I'm about to say endurance a few times, I'm talking about different muscle endurances here. So I'm still in the stamina category. I'm not talking about cardiovascular efficiency or anything. Um, so if we go from uh, we have regular stamina, which is just repeated contractions, right? Like muscle endurance. Cool. Well, then we have neuromuscular efficiency, which could fall under the category of that strength endurance, where there's a strength. It's a harder contraction. It's a more aggressive contraction, but we're trying to maintain it, right? So it's different. It's kind of like introducing stamina to a faster twitch muscle, whereas regular muscle endurance might be going into those slow twitch and fast twitch, and maybe a mix of those, right? If you think of it that way. Now, the demands of life, you kind of have to look at. You probably want to cater more to fast twitch muscles as you're aging, for the simple fact that most of our slips, trips, falls are risky things, or are the things that are going to be taken away from us from age faster, are the faster twitch fibers, right? So I would always kind of put those on a pedestal above the slower things, but I'm not saying disregard those slower things. I would say try to find a balance. But if you're prioritizing it in the session, I would say strength endurance should be ahead of uh, regular muscle endurance or regular stamina that we were talking about earlier, where it's like a lot of contractions, just continuous movement. That's a great way to finish a workout typically. But if you're doing strength endurance, you're typically doing like sets from anywhere from like 6 to probably 15, maybe upwards of 20 reps, but the weight is heavy for that. Um, and that would be a good way to train your strength endurance. So think of a cycle of strict press, like pressing overhead, where you maybe, I mean, you could progress these lots of different ways, but let's just say one of the progressions could be as simple as this week I'm going to do 3 sets of 15, next week 3 sets of 12, then 4 sets of 10, then uh, 4 sets of 8, then 5 sets of 6. Like that could be a progression of strength endurance where it's getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And then if you did that cycle 2 times through, your second time through that cycle would be like, I'm beating all my weights, right? That's a patient cycle because it takes, probably 9 or 10 weeks to get through. But my point there is you can train strength endurance. So that's hard contractions enduring over time. Another type of endurance that we don't think about is just power maintenance. All right. So this is where, we have these 10 components of fitness, but we can train all of them lots of different ways. And all of them do kind of come back and interweave with each other, right? You need cardiovascular endurance to improve your stamina as well, right? So you need cardiovascular endurance to some extent to improve your strength numbers at some point too, because you won't be able to train as much if you don't. So they're interweaved at all times, right? But again, we're looking to be best across the 10 of them. So when I look at like power maintenance, this is something that would really benefit like a soccer player, but I mean, a lot of people who are playing recreational sports as well, where you have pretty short rest intervals, but high power output. So the speed of the movement is the premium. So let's say it's uh, like 3 high box jumps, rest 30 seconds, and repeat that for 10 minutes. And you'd be like, okay, that's a lot of box jumps for a high height, right? That's putting a premium on that power and maintaining that over time. The other way you could do that is I'm going to do a max amount of those box jumps in like 3 minutes. So now time is fixed, but your repetitions are unknown and you're trying to just maintain that power output. And you see a lot of maintaining power stamina, I would call it, in CrossFit workouts because there's a lot of movements that require fast hips. So if you're looking at like barbell cycling, you could think barbell cycling, I know it's poo-pooed in Olympic lifting and a lot of like traditional strength and conditioning. But again, if we're looking for maintaining power over time and we want to isolate it to, let's say, the hip or something, doing hang power cleans would be phenomenal for lots of higher repetitions there, right? Um, so that's where you kind of interweave these other components of fitness, but you need regular muscle endurance. So that's just like lots of contractions. You need strength endurance. You need power endurance, right? And so all these different three kinds there alone kind of speak to stamina. But now there's one more that's actually like aerobic muscle endurance. So this would be longer bouts that kind of hit near failure or your heart rate is extraordinarily elevated, so therefore your heart and lungs are being like really compressed as far as their abilities go, and then you try to do longer sets or more stamina based sets. So a good example of that would be like including harder efforts of assault bike in with like longer sets of whatever you're trying to work on. Let's say it's the push up again, so it could be like uh okay, I'm going to do, 5 rounds per time of a 20-calorie bike and 20 push-ups. And that's putting a damper on your body's ability to contract on a cellular level. So it's happening a little bit more in the cell because you're not pacing the bike such that you're totally recovered. You're actually hitting it pretty hard. Um, so that would be one of those ones where you're trying to teach the muscle how to contract while from like a cardiovascular standpoint, it's not there. Um, and that would be probably like that fourth version. So you have regular muscle endurance, just produce the contraction over and over and over and over and over again. Then you have power endurance, so explosive ones, minimal rest, but being able to sustain your explosiveness and your power. You have strength endurance, being able to lift a heavier load for higher amounts of repetitions um, over sets, let's say. So again, that's ranging from 6 to 20 reps, but the weight is kind of the premium, not how fast you move it. And you have aerobic muscle endurance is where there is a challenge from a cardiovascular standpoint that hinders your ability to contract your muscles, and therefore you're working stamina in a different way. So those are like 4 different ways. Now I would say you should always start from the ground and work your way up. If you're new to fitness, especially, that stamina training can be brutal if you're doing it in the wrong order. So I would definitely start with regular muscle endurance, and remember the goal is to keep you moving. Watch for total volume hurting you, right? You can do too much in a short amount of time. So err on the side of not enough and build. And then once it's like, okay, I don't ever get hurt and I do a lot of repetitions, then it's like time to move on and time to incorporate other stamina. So I would go with regular muscle endurance first. Then I would probably start leaning into strength endurance and then power endurance and then aerobic endurance. And you could throw in aerobic endurance in the middle anywhere, but it just is a very difficult type to train, and it takes a little bit. It's a little harder to recover from too, because it's very high stress for your body. So those are all great ways to train stamina. I don't know that I have. I know. I'm sorry. Jeff's not here. He's like, I don't know, the coast or something, like by the beach. He's like, I mean, I could join, but like kids will be loud and the ocean's loud, and it's like, yeah, rub it in, dude. Whatever. At any rate, that I think kind of concludes. Unless you guys have questions, we could put in your comments, like, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions on fitness training, remember in this podcast, we're going over one component of fitness every single week. Right now, we're on the second component of stamina. Next week, we will be doing, I believe it's strength. Yeah, next week is strength. Um, so we will be talking about that ability to produce force, basically. Really looking forward to that one. I think everybody loves to talk that, and it's kind of like our first shift in gears. Oh, one more thing about stamina is it's considered an organic adaptation. So what that means is if you ripped the body apart and kind of dissected things and put it under a microscope, you can see on a cellular level to your muscle with that. And that what change you would likely see with a lot of stamina training is you're going to see a lot more slow twitch fibers, because you're trying to repeat contractions over and over again. Or and this is their science is still being developed on the fast twitch stuff because they're finding different styles of fast twitch, and you might see more of one style or another based off of your ability to uh, produce the contractions over and over again. So there are different types of fast twitch fibers, but we generally just talk about one or the other. If you're just a normal person looking to train, remember that stamina is one of your key uh, things to one, not getting tired throughout your day if there's anything physical going on, and then two, it's kind of a safety thing, right? You want to protect your muscle and your joints, and the best way to do that is to make sure a muscle doesn't get so tired that it can't do it anymore, and then another muscle gets overloaded in that process, because usually overloading a muscle creates a strength tension imbalance, which is usually what's going to start causing some higher degrees of inflammation, pain, injury, etc. So stamina is definitely a premium for training if you're looking for longevity. All right, guys, that does it on the See You in Valhalla podcast, episode 14. Again, any questions, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And pretty soon we'll be getting this out into the ethers, in Spotify, I believe, is kind of the next go-to place. Um, we have a lot of fun things happening at CrossFit Magni. If you're in the Boise area and you want to check it out, I highly recommend it. What we're trying to do in the next month or so is a lot more like smaller community events where I think we're going to Top Golf one week. We got Murph Prep Mondays. Every Monday we're preparing for a really long workout, and that's going to happen on Memorial Day. And then we'll have a barbecue and a pool party on Memorial Day. Uh, let's see, there's Bring a Friend Week from that week of May 15th. So if you're a CrossFit Magni member currently, make sure that you are starting to prod your friends about drinking the Kool-Aid and joining our cult. It's not really a cult. Everybody chill on the internet, whatever. But yeah, so if you're looking to change someone's life, and if you feel CrossFit has changed your life, and if you haven't felt like we've changed your life yet, then we probably need to talk, because maybe there's more to this conversation and more to the mental approach of how we're training and things like that, because this methodology really is built for sustaining life over a long period of time. But it's easy for people to do it wrong. So we're trying to teach people how to do it right. All right, guys. See you next week.